What's up, Amelia? Dayspring here with an episode of Power of X-Men to discuss Screen Rant's article that they just dropped. 10 lessons the MCU's X-Men needs to learn from the original trilogy. Marvel Studios is moving forward with an X-Men reboot for the MCU, and the upcoming project can learn several lessons from Fox's previous X-Men films. So what's important to note, this is not the prequels or any spin-offs. This is just the original trilogy that Screen Rant is talking about. And I thought this was a really fun article. We can break it down. I haven't read it yet. And I thought to myself, man, we have a cool new intro with Power of X-Men done by my brother-in-law. And I really wanted to launch a segment where we just have conversations about the X-Men, about Marvel, about the MCU in general, about the X-Men in the MCU. And I thought we could call it something fun like Midnight Marvel, something fun like that, where it's just us, reading news, reacting to it, discussing our feels as a community. There's no right or wrong way to feel about any of the stuff we discuss. It's just having a very nuanced conversation about Marvel's merry mutants and how much we love them so. I thought we could dive into this article. It was published just 5 hours ago. And let's dive into it. Marvel Studios' X-Men reboot can learn several valuable lessons from the original trilogy of X-Men films produced by 20th Century Fox. Marvel Studios chief Kevin Feige first teased the introduction of the mutants into the MCU in 2019, shortly after the finalization of Disney's acquisition of 20th Century Fox. While Ms. Marvel's Kamala Khan and Black Panther's Wakanda Forever's Namor have been confirmed to be mutants, the MCU's X-Men team is yet to be seen, though several actors from Fox's X-Men universe have reprised their roles as mutant characters from across the MCU's multiverse. And there have been several recent announcements in development of Marvel Studios' X-Men reboot. All right, so let's just unpack some of that first paragraph right there before we dive into their list of lessons. I am so excited to have the X-Men in the MCU. And if you haven't seen the Marvels yet, you're getting your official spoiler warning in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Spoiler warning. Last spoiler warning. So obviously at the end of the Marvels, in the post-credit scene, we saw Monica waking up in an alternate universe where Binary, aka her mom, was watching over her, and Kelsey Grammer as Beast, and they were in what appeared to be the X-Lab. So, there's a lot of talk now about where the X-Men are going to next show up in the MCU. Obviously, this is an alternate parallel dimension. So it's not the official MCU universe, but it is an alternate dimension, and we know Deadpool 3 is going to be dealing with a lot going on. I honestly just wish they would do a straight up reboot of the X-Men in the MCU. As much as I love the Fox cast, I was sold that Days of Future Past back in 2013. I was sold on the idea that Days of Future Past was our final goodbye to the original actors from the first trilogy. And I love them all. I think they were all so great. We've talked about Halle Berry recently on the podcast. She deserves every apology from any shady fan from back in the day, because Halle Berry really was an advocate for Storm. James Marsden and Famke Janssen, absolutely perfect as Cyclops and Jean. Obviously, James Marsden could have gotten a lot more screen time, but Famke Janssen, what an IRL goddess. She is the living embodiment of our God Queen on Earth. And Hugh Jackman, of course, Hugh Jackman was a wonderful Wolverine. That's why we're so excited for Deadpool 3. But with Deadpool 3, doing multiverse hopping with, the end of the Marvel showing a parallel universe where Binary Beast are in, and they have to go talk to Charles with Multiverse of Badness, showing us Professor Xavier. I'm just kind of like, this is so needlessly complicated. And unfortunately, no one is talking about the Marvels. The Marvels is tracking to be the lowest MCU box office performer out of all the. And this is the one that has the X-Men in it. It just really breaks my heart that this is where the MCU is going, and this is our introduction to the X-Men. So I'd rather them just do a straight reboot, forget about the Fox films, forget about the multiverse. I know it worked for Spider-Man. I mean, listen, I get it. Spider-Man was a $2 billion success, and you brought in Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire. I can understand why you want to bring back in the original actors from the original trilogy. But man, I just want a straight up reboot of the X-Men, and I want the X-Men done right. I want the X-Men to be as popular as the Avengers have been these last few years. But I wanted to pull on a thread here because it's really interesting that they mentioned that already within the MCU, we already have, two established mutants. The first one being Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, as performed by Iman Vellani. And, I don't know what the decision process was like to make Iman Vellani's Ms. Marvel, Kamala Khan, a mutant in the MCU. As we've talked about on this podcast, that was very much, it felt, as a viewer, a last-minute decision that was put into the post-credit scene of the series. The series had taken its entire course to talk about Kamala Khan's power being of Jinn origin and being familial based, dispelling that she was an Inhuman. And now all of a sudden, in that post-credit scene, there was something in her genetics that made her a mutant. She had a mutation in her genetics. And then we get the X-Men 97 theme, and it cuts to black. So that felt like a very last minute add-on to me. I have said this before. I've asked around some sources. I'm like, so whose call was it to make Kamala Khan a mutant in the MCU? And, again, I got a snide remark from the person I asked. They were like, obviously Kevin Feige. I'm like, it was Kevin Feige himself? I was like, no, well, someone in Kevin Feige's office. I'm like, I want to know who it was. It just feels like they were like, oh, Kamala Khan could be potentially a big deal in the MCU. And instead of making her an Inhuman, let's make her a mutant. Okay. You know how I feel about that? I would have loved to have kept her as an Inhuman. I think her origin story works as an Inhuman. The counter argument I always get is that she was originally conceived as a mutant, to which I always say, well, Storm was originally conceived as a cat. Nightcrawler was originally conceived as a Legion of Heroes, over at DC. There's a lot of things that are in the back end that the characters originally conceived as, but once it hits, paper, that's where you start considering it canon. And I just think Kamala Khan's that volume 1 of Ms. Marvel of Kamala Khan in Jersey City is absolutely perfect. I love that she is a Inhuman. I'm not vibing with her being a mutant, but that's fine. My concern here with Kamala is that she is front and center right now in the X books with Rise and Fall that's happening in January. And we have two problems. One, the Marvel's box office, again, is tracking to be the lowest MCU movie ever during its box office run. And secondly, the Ms. Marvel show was the least watched MCU Disney Plus series. And is she just going to fade to the background now? Is she no longer going to be a priority as a character? I love Kamala so much, and I feel like this character has suffered so much from all these film rights IPs, right? If she was originally conceived to be a mutant, but she couldn't be a mutant because they didn't have the X-Men film rights at the time, so they had to make her an Inhuman. Then they pushed her as an Inhuman, but oh wait, the Inhumans tanked as a movie. So now that we have the film rights to the X-Men, make her mutant. I'm like, that's so unfair for the character because she is such a great character. And Iman Vellani is such a wonderful actress. I mean, she is stellar casting as a character. And in fact, we did reach out to her publicist to try to get her on the podcast, but sadly, we were denied. I'm very sad about that. But I think Iman Vellani is doing such a great job. But I worry that since her Disney Plus show and the Marvels isn't doing well, she's still going to be a priority for the company. I mean, we're not just talking it was mediocre. We're talking these are the lowest of the lows that the MCU has ever seen, and it makes me really sad. And the next is Noah Mod, Namor. And, we're big Namor fans here. We love Namor, and I think he was one of the best parts of Black Panther. But Tenoch Huerta has been accused of some allegations, and I wonder how all of that is going to play out in the future. There's already 2 red flags for the 2 mutants in the MCU. Like, oh, man, the MCU just can't catch a break now. So I'm worried about the X-Men in the MCU proper because the two mutants we have, they each have very different hurdles before them as IPs. And again, the thing is, these movies need to be billion-dollar franchises. And you can say, well, not every movie needs to be a billion-dollar franchise. And that's fair. I will tend to agree with you on that. But these movies are manufactured in that way, and they should be bringing in that level of money. And I want the X-Men to be that popular. How about that? I personally, Paul, want the X-Men to be that popular. I think they are deserving. The X-Men are a wonderful team. They're very diverse. They're very fun. They have heavy drama. They should be back at the epicenter of pop culture and superhero movies, just like how they were during the 90s and those early Fox films. Okay, anyways, back to Screen Rant's list. And I like Screen Rant quite a bit, by the way. I like Screen Rant quite a bit. Okay, with a new version of the X-Men set to debut in the MCU soon, the previous iteration of the team from Fox's X-Men universe are expected to bid farewell. 20th Century Fox acquired the film rights to Marvel Comics, Mutants, and the X-Men in 1994 and quickly set to work developing a franchise, kicking off with a trilogy of projects including 2000's X-Men, 2003's X2, and 2006's X-Men: The Last Stand. And not that anyone asked, but the way I would rank these three movies, I would put X2, X-Men, and then Last Stand. Oh, Last Stand was rough. It was a really hard movie to get through. I like it now in the context of the Days of Future Past, and First Class films, because it kind of wiped Last Stand from existence. But man, it was a tough movie to get through. I remember the night we saw it, I was so disappointed. I was in college and we were about to move to New York. And it was the last film we saw midnight showing in our college town in Tallahassee, Florida. And I was so disappointed by it. Oh. Films in Fox's X-Men universe achieved varying levels of success, but Marvel Studios can learn a lot of valuable lessons from the previous film series, from both wins and mistakes when developing an X-Men project for the MCU. So it has been reported that Kevin Feige is taking pitches for an X-Men project in the MCU, and that kind of makes me nervous because I don't really want other people to come in to tell Marvel how the X-Men should be. I think I may be in the minority here, but I think a lot of the directors and creatives that are working in the MCU have too much power. I really do want Kevin Feige to kind of close ranks and rein a lot of these creators in. I want the MCU to have their own the brain trust, the creative agency of the MCU. I want them to have sort of what they want for the X-Men in mind, and bringing in a director that can enhance that direction. I've been reading The Reign of the MCU, that book that just came out a couple of weeks ago. And one of the secret sauces of the MCU has been that Kevin Feige and Marvel would just tell people like, hey, you just film all the pieces, send it back to us, and we'll put the puzzle together. We'll put the movie together. And I really do love that approach. I just think when you're dealing with, a franchise and stories that are interwoven and really larger than life, you do need a central hub to do that quality, and care check, quality and assurance check to make sure that everything sort of lines up. So I don't want someone to come off the streets and be like, this is what I would do with the X-Men. Absolutely not. No. Kevin Feige and the creative quorum or brain trust, whatever you want to call it at Marvel, they need to sit down and figure out what the X-Men in the MCU should be, what it would look like, what would appease fans, and then hire talent that can help enhance that, is my feeling. Okay. All right. So here are the 10 lessons. I'm going to start off at number 10. And the number 10 lesson is X-Men Heroes should be developed away from the team. Fox only focused on Wolverine as a solo hero. 20th Century Fox did a great job of developing Hugh Jackman's Wolverine as a solo character away from the main X-Men team. But the same treatment wasn't given to other members of the group. While Jackman received a solo trilogy, the likes of Halle Berry's Storm, Famke Janssen's Jean Grey, and James Marsden's Cyclops were only seen in the primary X-Men films. Well, no, Jean she was an apparition to Logan in the Wolverine. And were often neglected as focus was put on Wolverine, Patrick Stewart's Professor X, and Ian McKellen's Magneto. Marvel Studios can change this in the MCU, giving each member of the X-Men team their fair share of development before bringing them together, akin to the Infinity Saga's Avengers. Yeah, and I think that's why a lot of people wanted to see Rogue in the Marvels. A lot of people wanted to see Storm in Wakanda Forever. He wanted to start bringing these characters in from the background. But in order for that to happen, I mean, I don't disagree with what this article is saying, but in order for this to be happening, you need to establish the X gene in a very prolific way in the MCU already. As of right now, the only indication that we know that there's something with genetics and mutation is from the Miss Marvel series. I did see the Marvels again a second time. I took my nieces to go see it. I did not see any hint of Kamala being a mutant in it. I was looking out for it. Someone told me it was in the scene in the living room when they were pulling up the iPad with their dossier on it, that they mentioned her genetics. Unless it's written on the actual dossier and someone had great vision and was able to see it, it is not mentioned in story. If it was so quick that on the second time I still didn't hear it. But there has been no hint that the X gene or any mutation exists in the MCU apart from, obviously knowing that Noah Mord is a mutant. But the only time the actual gene has been acknowledged was in the post-credit scene of the Miss Marvel TV series. So in order for the X-Men to be assembling in the background, you have to have the X gene. They have to be mutants. So in order for the X-Men to be assembling in the background, they have to be mutants. That X gene has to be present. And as of right now, there's no proof of that. And seeing as we're only getting one MCU movie next year, this plan could take a while. So, Famke Janssen's Jean Grey, I think she got a story, whether it was good or not, it's left open to us, the audience members. I will say that I think you can see in X1, after the machine with Rogue explodes and like the white light that's supposed to turn humans into mutants, dissipates. You see Jean having that obvious reaction. That's because the barriers that Xavier put in her mind, sort of came down, and she became the next stage of evolution. That's where the Phoenix, story was planted. And then obviously that carries through to X2 when Cyclops is like, ever since the Liberty incident, every time you have a nightmare, the entire bed shakes. So you do have that through line with Jean. It didn't stick the landing in Last Stand. That was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. And yes, Cyclops, James Marsden should have gotten more time as the leader of the X-Men, as Jean's love interest, but it was going to go to Hugh Jackman. I forgot where I had read this quote, but someone said, it was always going to be Hugh Jackman. He's the lead man of the franchise, and Famke, is the lead actress of the franchise. Of course, they are the romantic interest. You're going to get that. So, unfortunately, the way Hollywood was back then, no, I'm not saying it's true for today, but back then, that's just how Hollywood operated. That's why James Marsden didn't really get much of a role. He wasn't available for filming long term for X3 because he signed up for Bryan Singer's Superman Returns. So, he wasn't really available for Last Stand, and that's why he was killed off very quickly. It was very unfortunate. We all wanted Cyclops to have a larger role, and James Marsden was a good actor in the role. He played a very fine Cyclops. But yes, I mean, he had a substantial role in X1. X2, he was brainwashed and really serviced no plot until the end when he was like, Jean, please don't do this. And then he was killed off in X3. Halle Berry Storm, we've talked about this before. Halle Berry, she was a big advocate for Storm. And, we've had the Lee Walds, who, were the showrunners for X-Men, the animated series, say two things to us in an interview. One, they said that if they can go back in time with the X-Men animated series, the original 1992 one, they would have given Storm a bigger role. And I agree, even though Storm is very iconic in that series in terms of plot and overarching story, she doesn't really have much. But thankfully, however, thanks to really good voice acting, animation, and just overall a goddess as a character. I mean, Storm is iconic in that series, but they wish they could have given her more to do and more of a story. And, secondly, they said that they had taken a look at Joss Whedon's revisions to the original X-Men script, and their note was that Storm didn't have very much to do. Now, we know that there was supposed to be a running gag throughout the first X-Men film where Toad would have been like, do you know what happens when a Toad does this? Do you know what happens when a Toad does that? So that's why at the end, when Storm says, do you know what happens to a Toad when he gets hit by lightning? That infamous line that people make fun of Halle Berry for. Well, because in the original script, that would have been the gag, that Toad was always coming in being like, do you know what happens when a Toad does this? And that's why, she was supposed to have the final word there. We saw her step up in X2. Obviously, she had just gotten that Oscar, and she was in a position to negotiate a better story. That's just how Hollywood works. And we know for X-Men 3 that she was given a dummy script where it would have opened up with Storm saving children in Africa. And, when Matthew Vaughn met with the studio to discuss it, they were like, oh, this is just a script for Halle Berry. We're probably going to throw it out afterwards. And Matthew Vaughn was like, that's not really cool. But, so Halle Berry, Storm, I agree. She should have a lot to do. Storm, Wolverine, and Cyclops and Jean should have plenty to do in a new franchise. I will say that. And by the way, Xavier is another character that often got, sidelined in the first X-Men. I think Bryan Singer said this. What do you do with a character so powerful like Xavier? Because he kind of ruins your plot because he can just fix anything. So that's why he's incapacitated in both X1 and X2. Well, fun fact there. Okay, MCU's X-Men needs to focus around Professor X. Okay, I know we're only talking about the original trilogy, but obviously, in the prequels, it did surround itself around Professor X. I definitely don't think the Xavier character has been lacking a story in the Fox X-Men universe. Just saying. Patrick Stewart portrayed Professor X in Fox's X-Men universe, with his appearance in 2022's Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness as a variant of Professor X. Patrick Stewart became the longest-running actor in any Marvel movie franchise, as he first appeared as Charles Xavier, the founder of the X-Men, in 2000's X-Men. Stewart was consistently one of the strongest elements in Fox's X-Men universe, guiding the team and introducing audiences to mutants in an understandable and accessible way. I agree on that. That first scene where he explains the X-Men and the school to Hugh Jackman's Wolverine in X-Men 1, perfect. This idea can be repeated in Marvel Studios' X-Men reboot, as Professor X is the cornerstone of the team. Though the MCU should give him more development than Fox ever did, as his backstory and personal life were seldom explored. Okay. I agree in the first trilogy, his backstory and personal life were seldomly explored, but we do have prequels that focus all around Xavier, his relationship with Eric, his relationship with Raven, his relationship with assembling the X-Men, how he became paralyzed, and his relationship with Moira. So I don't know. I don't necessarily agree with that, but yes, in the context of just the first three movies, agreed. But I think the key is also to make Xavier a little bit egotistical and jerky, right? We kind of see that in the Krakoan age, where you have characters like WizKid, who in an age of resurrection, they can resurrect their bodies any which way they want. And WizKid is like, you know what? I am perfect in this hover chair. I am proud of my body. But Xavier, is like, nope, I'm going to be walking around. So I think there is an element of ego with Xavier. I think Xavier isn't the saint everyone thinks he is. I think he has done some really shady stuff in the past. And I think that's kind of the key when leaning into the Xavier mythos or the essence of the character. You want him to be inspiring in the way that we had Patrick Stewart and even the X-Men animated series Xavier. But I would, to flesh him out a little bit more in the context of this article, agreeing with it, I would give him some kind of shady, jerky behavior, And I think, by the way, I think Dark Phoenix did that really well, where, James McAvoy's Xavier was like, hey, I have a direct line to the president and the president needs us to do this. Like, I like that element of Xavier. It's okay for Xavier to be a little arrogant. I think that's a hallmark of him as a character. All right, number 8. Magneto needs to be pivotal to the MCU's X-Men. Yeah, that's a great lesson. I agree. Well, let's see what they say here before I weigh in on my thoughts. Magneto and Professor X's relationship is important. Yes, it is. It is very important. While a focus on Professor X is paramount to the development of the MCU's X-Men, it's difficult to tell his side of the story without also focusing on his arch enemy and sometimes ally, Magneto. Ian McKellen portrayed Eric Lehnsherr in Fox's original X-Men trilogy, with him and Patrick Stewart perfectly explaining their intricate backstory and opposing philosophies. While Xavier believes humans and mutants can live side by side, Lehnsherr considers mutants supreme and wants to eliminate humanity to ensure mutant survival, emanating from his emotional backstory as a Holocaust survivor. That's a beautiful sentence. Beautiful sentence. Props to the writer here. The relationship between Xavier and Magneto is hugely important to the operations of the X-Men, so must be explored in the MCU. I would also take a page out of the Leewalds. Again, the showrunners for X-Men, the animated series back in 1992, which they told us that it was really important for them in the first episode to introduce the Sentinels and the government as a villain, because by the time you get to Magneto, you think, well, maybe Magneto's approach isn't wrong. Maybe he's not this black and white bad guy. So I like the idea of Magneto being morally great. Same with Xavier. If Xavier's supposed to be the saint with jerky behaviors, Magneto can be this larger than life villain with very human motives. That is how I would characterize those two characters, and why it's so important that they get Xavier and Magneto right. I do agree. I think at the core of X-Men ideology, you do boil down to, in a very rudimentary pre-Krakoa world, it really does boil down to brotherhood and X-Men, and those are ideas that resonate with fans in general. So I agree with that point. Wholeheartedly agree with that point. Okay, X-Men movies need to lean into heroes' larger-than-life powers. Oh, I agree. And I'm sorry, before we get into this paragraph, I just want to say, when I first took my friends to see X-Men 1, I used to hang out with my best friends, Megan and Yasmin. And Megan and Yasmin were like really cool. You know, they listened to Hole. They shopped at Hot Topic. You know, they could go out to clubs, and we were only like 15, 16. I mean, we grew up in Miami. It was a wild time. But I took them to go watch the first X-Men movie, and Megan just turned to me and she's like, wow, the X-Men were really weak. They got their butts kicked. And I'm like, I didn't know how to defend them. But yeah, their powers weren't really shown larger than life. And, you know, we didn't even get a Phoenix effect in X-Men 3. You know what I mean? Like, So, yes, show that these characters have larger than life powers. Please. Fox's X-Men films didn't display the enormity of the team's powers. Oh, great. Fox's X-Men universe was one of the first major superhero movie franchises, so the studio likely scaled back its characters' ability as to not deter viewers from witnessing anything too strange. That's fair. Also, in fairness, Megan, like 20 plus years later, Megan, that's fair. You have to understand, we're coming off of the heels of Batman and Robin. This is pre-Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. The X-Men films were, for the first time, taking the superhero genre seriously. So I agree. You couldn't be too out there. It was just, you were testing the waters. They were genre leading in that regard. So I agree with this. I love the statement that this writer says. Fox's X-Men universe was one of the first major superhero movie franchises, so the studio likely scaled back its characters' abilities as to not deter viewers from witnessing anything too strange. That is a fair statement. I think that's very fair when we look back on that. Grandpa Dayspring has been around a long time, and he's been a fan of the X-Men for a very long time. This meant that supremely powerful heroes such as Storm, Iceman, and Jean Grey had their powers weakened significantly, which is something that Marvel Studios must change. After a decade and a half of the MCU, audiences have become used to seeing some remarkable powers on screen, so the MCU's X-Men team will finally have the opportunity to show off the full range of their incredible abilities and will surely change the status quo of the MCU forever. Here's hoping, man. Fingers crossed. MCU's X-Men, number 6. Number 6, MCU's X-Men must be more comic accurate. Fox failed to accurately adapt many X-Men characters. I agree on that. I agree. It's, by the way, and in fairness, Rogue is the first one that comes to mind. In fairness, when you're talking about early aughts Y2K culture, a teenager not being able to touch another human being, they are going to be inward. I don't disagree with that, but my main note would be, it's not that the initial adaptation was incorrect, it's that we failed to see an evolution of that adaptation, right? Rogue starting off as a shy 14-year-old who just got her powers is perfectly fine. But by the time we saw her in Days of Future Past, man, I was waiting for her to just turn around and punch that Sentinel and be like, and what, sugar? Because we know Anna Paquin could play Sassy Southern from True Blood, A, but B, we want to see these characters develop through time. And they still just kept the character too much like from square one and refused to evolve it. Okay. Let's see what they say here. Not only should Marvel Studios put more focus on showing off the X-Men's incredible abilities, but more attention should be given to making sure the team's members are more comic accurate than their depictions in Fox's X-Men universe. In Marvel Comics, the X-Men have vivid costumes, deep connections to other heroes. Agreed. Why Mystique and Nightcrawler weren't son and mother in the Fox X-Men is baffling to me. That's such a missed opportunity. And a range of powers never seen in live action. So the MCU's X-Men needs to ensure these characters are adapted faithfully. Agreed. Images from 2024's Deadpool 3 show these changes may already have been made, as Hugh Jackman will sport a comic-accurate Wolverine costume alongside Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool's, which spells good news for the future of the X-Men. Yeah, I know a lot of people are complaining that Hugh Jackman has those sleeves when he should be sleeveless. I'm fine with it. I think let's see how the movie unfolds. You know what I mean? And you never know what they can fix in post or what plans they have for Wolverine in the movie. But I think what we're seeing with Ryan Reynolds is Deadpool 3 right now has all been good. I would really like them to lean into what I was just saying, like taking those characters. It's okay to make them modern. I think that's one of the best things the MCU does. Like Aunt May, for example, we did not get a very elderly woman who would be in her 80s taking care of Peter Parker. They're like, no, she's supposed to be, sister of one of his dead parents. She would be in her late 40s, early 50s. And I thought Marissa Tomei was fantastic casting, and they did a twist on it where it was Tom Holland's Spider-Man's origin story. So I would say keep that in mind when you're doing when you're doing the X-Men. Like, modernize them a little bit for audiences, but also don't be afraid to lean into their story and develop it further. Don't get stuck like Anna Paquin's Rogue, which again just stayed the same throughout the course of the character's story in the Fox X-Men films. Number 5, a younger cast would be perfect for the MCU's X-Men. Oh, I have said this all the time. I hope they take the Harry Potter route, which is cast younger actors and let them grow up over the course of a decade for audience members. How they've been doing it with Tom Holland's Spider-Man. Cast them very young and let them grow into the roles, let them change throughout the years. I think that would be so great. Audiences watch Fox's X-Men grow from kids into heroes. 2000's X-Men may have introduced audiences to the adult X-Men team, but the project also debuted several young actors as mutant students at Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters, while Sean Ashmore's Bobby Drake, Anna Paquin's Marie, and Alexander Burton's John weren't the focus of the original X-Men film. Audiences watched them grow from children into adults over the course of Fox's first trilogy, eventually becoming the bona fide heroes and villains, Iceman, Rogue, and Pyro, respectively. Well, first of all, Alexander Burton didn't stick around, for the entire franchise. He was eventually recasted with Aaron Stanford. So, the Alexander Burton, I mean, you should Google that story, Familia. A lot happened to this actor on the set of the first X-Men. And he did not come back. But when thinking about the development, I don't know. I don't think I've said my piece with Rogue already. Sean Ashmore's Iceman was fine, I think, in the context of Days of Future Past, not the first trilogy, but Days of Future Past. And I think he had a really great scene in X-Men 3 when he was battling against Pyro, but I don't know. But yes, I agree. You need to cast them young and let them grow for the audiences. Number 4, the Dark Phoenix saga needs to be done right. I couldn't agree more on this. Fox made 2 attempts at adapting Marvel Comics' Dark Phoenix saga. I get comfortable because I'm going to be ranting about this for like the next 2 hours. But let's see what they say first, and then I'll give my thoughts here. Marvel Comics' Dark Phoenix saga is one of the X-Men's most transformative storylines, so it's no wonder that 20th Century Fox wanted to develop it for live action. However, 2006's X-Men The Last Stand failed to capture the magic and tragedy of the Dark Phoenix saga, and 2019's X-Men Dark Phoenix suffered the same problems. Yeah, those movies are very similar in terms of plot. But anyways, particularly since both projects neglected to stick to the actual narrative laid out in the comics. Marvel Studios, although likely to stay away from the Dark Phoenix saga for a while, agreed, can fix these mistakes as more elements of the storyline have already been established in the MCU, meaning a more comic-accurate tale can be delivered. So here's the thing about a lot of X-Men stories, and in particular the Dark Phoenix saga. You have to build up towards a lot of these stories in the X-Men universe, right? You can't just do the Dark Phoenix saga as a one-and-done movie. You just can't do Age of Apocalypse. You can't just do Onslaught. You can't just do Messiah Complex. You can't just do Avengers versus X-Men. You can't just do House of M. You can't just do Krakoa. You have to slowly build towards these stories. You have to start off at square one with the original 5 X-Men. However the original 5 X-Men look in the MCU, it could be Storm, Gambit, Jubilee, Beast. It could be Jean, Cyclops, Wolverine, Storm. Whoever the original 5 are, you have to start at a very basic point. You have to establish these characters, and you have to give them significant character development, and then start going towards these stories. You establish, let's take Dark Phoenix, for example. Why did Dark Phoenix fail the first time around? I'm going to tell you why it failed the first time around, because they really, truly did not stick to any significant source material. I believe Bryan Singer originally saw that Jean as Phoenix was the next stage in evolution, that she was going to become evolution herself, and that she was supposed to evolve past being on the planet and ascending into the cosmos. And sort of the ending was supposed to be like, I'm going into the cosmos, but I'm always watching you guys. I believe that was what Bryan Singer's original plan for Jean and the Phoenix was going to be. And that in the context of the movie, they built it up really nicely. But what happened in X-Men The Last Stand, it just fell flat. I mean, it very much had too much going on in the movie. It did not focus on Jean, did not focus on anything pertaining to her power as Phoenix. She just stood around and was moody. And by the way, it's a testament to Famke Janssen that we loved her as Dark Phoenix, even with that red dress, because she is such a wonderful actress. But I would dare say the first trilogy just really couldn't nail the story. The second problem for the prequels, the problem was that we did not have any time with Sophie Turner as a character, right? We did not get to see how Jean fit into this team, how important she was, what she meant to other people, who her character was, and that they're going out into space and that she was going to sacrifice herself and save her team. You have to establish that romance with Cyclops. That was a big part of the Dark Phoenix saga, was the relationship between Jean and Cyclops, and what was at stake. I mean, this was the entire universe that was being threatened by Dark Phoenix, and yet these two just wanted to be together. It's very touching. It's very human. And also, I will dare say that the Dark Phoenix, in the prequels was too grounded, and it just did not follow the comics at all. But again, you build up towards these stories. You establish Jean as a character, her role in the X-Men, her relationship with Cyclops, her sacrificing herself, her coming back as Phoenix, her at one point being perceived as the weakest member of the team, and it's now the most powerful. But now this power is slowly corrupting her. And in an act of heroism, she sacrifices herself for the universe. Similarly with Age of Apocalypse, you establish Xavier, you establish his son Legion. You understand, you establish that Legion feels neglected by his father. Once his father's approval, goes back into the past to kill his arch enemy Magneto, but whoops, didn't realize that Xavier actually cared deeply for Magneto and would throw himself in front of a psychic blade to sacrifice himself to save his best friend, and therefore causing the Age of Apocalypse. You just have to build towards X-Men stories. That's what makes X-Men stories so great, is the emotion behind them. You can't just do them for a blockbuster movie. You have to build the emotional core with it. And that's why Wanda in the MCU is so good. That's why everyone loved and was excited for her in Multiverse of Madness, because they took the time to establish Wanda from Age of Ultron all the way through WandaVision. We had a story with Wanda, so by the time we got to Multiverse of Madness, we were dying to see what was going to happen. But they did not stick the landing, so they should learn about that. Number 3, MCU's X-Men storylines shouldn't be rushed. I just said that. The problem with many storylines in Fox's X-Men universe, I'm sorry, I'm so excited because I called it. Fox's X-Men universe was that they were simply rushed as the studio tried to cram too much into its projects. This was especially evident during the original X-Men trilogy and contributed to the problems with their Dark Phoenix Saga adaptation. Since Fox wanted to thrust audiences straight into superhero action, many characters saw little to no development throughout the series, and iconic Marvel comic storylines such as God Loves, Man Kills, and Gifted weren't done justice. I think God Loves, Man Kills was done justice. It was very different than what was in the comics, but they adapted that story successfully for the Y2K generation. But yeah, Gifted, I will say that Gifted, if you're just thinking of Gifted, Astonishing X-Men, that first 6-issue run where they discover the cure, Gifted, in terms of X-Men 3, they adapted the story pretty faithfully for it, right? You had Rogue servicing as the Beast character in the movies, but I will say Gifted and God Loves, Man Kills were done justice. I would disagree with that. I would say Dark Phoenix wasn't done justice. I just wouldn't say God Loves, Man Kills, and Gifted weren't. Marvel Studios needs to take care to develop stories organically and make sure that some of the more impactful moments of these narratives don't get overshadowed by all-out action. Agreed. All right. Number 2, X-Men movies need to balance action with social commentary. Yeah, and I hope this is something that the article is saying that they should learn, because I think there was a lot of social commentary in the original X-Men franchise. At the core of every mutant-centric storyline in Marvel Comics is discrimination and oppression that the mutants face from average humans, and this was delivered for the most part effectively in Fox's X-Men universe and must be explored in the MCU. 2000's X-Men, Senator Kelly feared mutants. 2003's X2 explored the hatred mutants experience from their own families and the government as well. I know that's Senator Kelly in the first one, but, the government, you had William Stryker raiding the school. That was a big part of X2. And 2006, the X-Men The Last Stand with the introduction of the mutant cure. These storylines were impactful and hugely important. So Marvel Studios must recreate some of this social commentary for the MCU's X-Men, taking care to display these issues sensitively while showing how harrowing it is for the mutant community. Agreed. And, one of the things that I am going to say about this is that Rob Liefeld had a podcast recently where he talked about bringing the X-Men back to basics in the comics. And I know he's a very divisive character in the X-Men community, but he said at the core of it, the X-Men are supposed to be outcasts. And in today's world, where there's a lot of hate and fear out there, you want to focus in on the X-Men as an IP as being outcasts and protecting those they fear and hate. I love that. I do think that is the core of the X-Men. I think that's why the X-Men resonate with audiences out of the Wednesday Warriors. I love Krakoa. I have said how much I love Krakoa. I think Krakoa has done a great job at revitalizing the X-Men IP from a comic book standpoint. But if you want to get those larger masses, I think you want to lean into the X-Men being outcasts. And, that's how I came to the X-Men. I was growing up, I felt different from other people around me. And the idea that there was a school in Westchester led by Professor Xavier that was ready to welcome me, and I would have had my own found family, and I had a power in me that made me special. I mean, that is a very powerful, powerful thing for a kid to feel. And that's why the X-Men have resonated with me. And that's why we are going through a Screen Rant article today. Okay, MCU's X-Men needs more diverse casting. Agreed. Let me tell you something. The best thing about the X-Men is that inherently, organically, the X-Men are very diverse. You can bring in so many different characters, and I think everyone would just love it so much. I mean, Psylocke, Bishop, Storm, Danny Moonstar, Jean Grey, Wolverine, Cyclops, Deadpool, Karma, Magma, Sunspot. Bring all of these characters in. Please, please, please. Dr. Reyes, please. Oh, with her spike powers. Okay, since any good X-Men project includes a sobering social commentary, the X-Men team itself needs to be an accurate representation of society, which means Marvel Studios needs to put much more attention on diverse casting than 20th Century Fox did. The X-Men are some of the most varied characters in Marvel Comics, but Fox's X-Men team was primarily comprised of white straight actors and characters. Storm's African heritage, Magneto's Jewish background, and characters from Cajun, Native American, Russian, and Japanese descent, among others, as well as characters in the LGBT community, can finally be explored in Marvel Studios' highly anticipated X-Men reboot, bringing diversity and representation to the MCU. I don't think there's anything that needs to be said there. I think the X-Men are, again, a wonderfully diverse set of characters. The only asterisk I would put there is, bring in those characters and put them at the forefront. I would also add that I do want to see how interwoven a lot of the relationships are with these characters, like Mystique being Nightcrawler's mom and being in a relationship with Destiny while also adopting Rogue. I would just love to see all of that in the MCU. So yes, diverse casting and lean into what makes these characters special as an IP. All right, Familia, that is Screen Rant's top 10 lessons that the MCU's X-Men needs to learn from the original trilogy. What do you think? How do you want to see the X-Men in the MCU? Which characters should be the first introduced? What theories do you have of the X-Men appearing in Secret Wars or getting a straight reboot after that? I do think the working rumor right now is that they are bringing in the Fox X-Men as a goodbye in Deadpool 3 and Secret Wars. And then after that, it's going to be a hard reboot in the MCU, and they're going to enter the mutant age. So what do you want to see? Assuming all this is true, what do you want to see during the mutant age? Do you want to see some of the original Fox casting to stick around, or do you just want a hard reboot? What stories do you want to see explored? Drop them in the comments below, and let's discuss as a familia.